slide I have been more towards workforce and employment and then regulation. So I think it'll be an important conversation this time. But this one, I want to start with Emma, because I think if you can talk through the care workforce is a jigsaw puzzle to solve, and everybody's struggling, whether they are in aged care, disability, early childhood, or any care sector. For so many challenges like shortages, like appropriate qualifications, certification, and licensing, and all those sorts. And then you guys are working across the whole care space. And then you have so can you talk about the genesis of the story, how you have evolved as an organization in terms of bringing that care workforce together, and where you are heading at?
Yeah, great. So Y-Careers is a startup social enterprise, and we're part of the YMCA group. We were recipients of funding based on sort of predicated around the two major issues that we're trying to solve. So young people today are still underemployed or unemployed, double the national rate. Go to regional remote communities, that can be triple, that can be quadruple the rate for young people. And our previous CEO during COVID identified and saw and had an aha moment when armed forces were being deployed to aged care centres. He said, there must be a better way. There's young people who want to work, there's workforce shortages in the care economy. So Y-Careers was born out of that to become a vehicle, to become an organisation that wants to transfer and deploy 15,000 young people into the care economy over the next 5 to 6 years. Have we done that? No. Is it a challenge? Yes. And it's the reason you're all in here in the room today is because the sectors are diverse, they're in distress, they're in reform, they're in every R word you can think: rejuvenating stage, redevelopment stage, regulatory phases, and we keep trying to find new ways. But what we don't do very well is we don't intersect, we don't cross over. So Y-Careers was born out of the idea of how can we create and become uniform to an entire approach. And our original idea was to have a holistic care worker. So a care worker that would be able to work across the care sector in aged care, disability care and childcare. We came up with a brave idea and a bold idea to let's go talk to ASQA about a care qualification that will intersect across the 3 or 4 industries. Of course, ASQA laughed at us and said, come back in 2 years' time and you have $1 million to invest and it'll take you 6 years. And we said, well, we've got time, we've got money, we've got government's money, let's spend it. So we're still on that journey to create that qualification. But what happened when we tried to put that into market, because we wanted to work in every single one of our sectors, we found employer resistance. We did one amazing thing though. We created an EBA for young people across all the different sectors. 4 different unions, 5 if you include the sub-branches, across all 3 awards, and we created an EBA paying above board rates for young people in traineeships across Australia. And it took 9.5 months. So we had this amazing instrument to use for young people, but we couldn't find the employers. And we couldn't find the employers because we need a Certificate 3 in individual support for aged care. The Certificate 3 in individual support for aged care has 1 unit that maps across to the Certificate 3 in ECEC, which is a new qualification as of 18, 24 months ago. Nothing matches, nothing blends, nothing comes together. Now, whilst we completely recognise there are absolute differences between the industries, there are nuances, there are different needs, there are different capabilities and sets, but the base fundamental of caring for people, and I think the beginning session put it really correctly. We're dealing with people, we're dealing with ourselves, it's us we're speaking about, it's people-centred, human-centric. This is young people-centric. And the myth we've busted is that young people want to work in this industry. 44 young people co-designed Y-Careers. Our branding, our colours, everything that our language that we use was designed by young people because they want to work in these areas. They just don't know how. They don't want to get paid crap. They don't understand you can get paid well in these industries. And they want to do meaningful work. So that's kind of the Y-Careers journey so far.
Thank you. Very powerful. I want to go to Lee. could you also elaborate, because yes, there is workforce and there is training challenges, and the most recent case in Melbourne of that young man, that situation in Melbourne, can you elaborate, what do you see the bigger challenges from a reform, from a workforce and regulation point of view, that using that as a use case?
Thanks, Dev. So, firstly, if I could just acknowledge the traditional owners of lands that I'm on today, Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and acknowledge their continuous connection to country, to community and culture. We've got a lot of lessons, as we've heard some of the speakers earlier say, we've got a lot of lessons that we could take from our First Nations communities. So I guess I'll also just begin by saying I'm heading towards the end of my career and I'm pretty fed up. I've spent 30 plus years working in child and family welfare, and it feels like we've been talking about the same sorts of worries for our children and for our families since I started working in 1990. So we've got to think about ways to do things differently and to address the same old problems in new ways. We know that there is a massive skill shortage in early education and care, and that with all of the reforms that are really to be applauded in a number of states and territories, including my home state of Victoria, that challenge is going to continue. According to different estimates, we're going to need something like between 20 and 40,000 educators annually to care for children in our early education care settings. But we can't do that at the risk of quality. And what we're seeing at the moment in Victoria and in New South Wales and in other parts of the country are the very nature of this work means that it attracts people with very nefarious intentions towards our most vulnerable. And whether that's children in early education and care, whether that's older Australians, people with a disability, people with mental health concerns, the reality is, and certainly the Royal Commission into the institutional responses to child sexual abuse certainly indicated that people are attracted to work with vulnerable communities because of the opportunity it provides to hurt them. And it's just not fucking good enough. The Australian Maltreatment Study, which Nicole spoke about before, that should shock every one of us to our core. 62% of the people in this room, that's 6 out of every 10 of us, have experienced at least one form of maltreatment as children. And actually, even more shocking than that was what that study found was that it was less common to have experienced no maltreatment than to have experienced 2 or more. At what point why are we not screaming from the rooftops about that? Why is that not something that we're deeply concerned about? But unless we focus on quality as the key issue for our services, unless we're looking at what does it need for our new graduates that we're going to need to pull through the system very quickly to meet the demand that we have in the service gaps that we have, unless we keep an eye on quality, and certainly Catherine spoke earlier from Snake around, the private providers that are in early education in particular. I mean, they're now the bulk of providers are private providers. They are part of the landscape of service delivery. But there must be a focus on quality. And quality is not just training people to understand, to do their mandatory child protection training. Only 2% of child protection notifications annually come from early years services. So this is a workforce that already understands what child abuse looks like. They're not reporting. On its own, it's not enough. Most early years educators do not do pre-service training to understand and respond to trauma. And those that do, about 43% of them, according to a survey we conducted a few years ago as a part of an evaluation of our work, show that 43% were looking at leaving the sector within the next 12 months. And in part, that was because of the lack of ongoing coaching, training and support for the workforce. So if we want to address the risk of harm to children in these services, if we're really serious about wanting to keep children safe in early years, we have to make an investment that is beyond just thinking that training is the answer. We know training attenuates, And I use the example sometimes of myself. I've done Microsoft Excel training about 100 times, but do not ask me to develop a spreadsheet, right? Because it's not part of my everyday. And if I was to develop a spreadsheet, I would need someone that trained up and was an expert and knew how to use that system to help me do it. I could keep going. I get really worked up, but
you can. I have a follow-up on that. From a point of view of, the knee-jerk reactions by the government saying, okay, let's have more cameras, let's have 2 people to look at the child nappy being changed. They might sound good from the point of view of public media. That is, we have done it. That's a problem, we have solved it. That's the problem, we have solved it. Are these quick fixes functioning or workable or not?
So let's not have men in early childhood. That's a fabulous idea, isn't it? In fact, let's not have men as fathers. Let's not have men in our homes. Let's not have male nurses. Let's not have men working in disability or in aged care. Absolutely a knee-jerk reaction. The vast majority of people that work in early education, including males, are committed, dedicated professionals who care about children the same way I hope everyone in this room does. There have been a lot of knee-jerk reactions over the last couple of weeks. Full disclosure, my niece and nephew were at one of the centres where the alleged perpetrator worked. In fact, it was his last place of employment, and my non-verbal 2.5-year-old niece had him as her caregiver in her room. This strikes a really personal note for me. But the notion that we therefore say, well, we need cameras in all centres, or we need 2 people to change a nappy, is completely out of step with the reality of working in early childhood. And the risk is that it gives a very false sense of security about how safe our children are when they're in those settings. We can do a lot of things. Don't waste a good crisis is part of what we're saying at the moment at the Alannah and Madeline Foundation where I work. There should be a spotlight on the quality of early education and care. We should be concerned and want to do things, but they're going to take time and effort and resources. That putting in a camera or getting males out of early education, they're risk-laden themselves as approaches. But what we need to do is be really thoughtful about the way we invest in those organisations to really deliver quality. It's a little bit like the Working with Children check. So most states and territories, as far as I know, have implemented a Working with Children check type scheme. They don't talk to one another. We don't have a national scheme that does that. But it also gives a very false sense of security because actually the perpetrator in Melbourne wasn't to the attention of the authorities there. He had a clean record. He was working in centres that, for the most part, as I understand it, had all met their quality assessment rating. So those things on their own are not going to be enough indicators of safety. We have to think about the way organisations are thinking about and responding, the way they are investing in coaching and support for their workforce, and really understanding how does child abuse show up, what does child trauma look like, and what should we be looking for in our workforce.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Alissa, workforce shortages has been a long-term problem within the aged care space, and long-term fixes versus short-term fixes of quick migration program, running a regional program, fixing the problem now, not working on the longer-term solution. Can you talk a bit more about the work you are doing within the regional programs, regional areas, and how are you managing or working on a longer-term workforce shortage challenge?
So I'm from Apollo Care. We are aged care, but also are in disability, and we have about 14 sites across the country. And as you said, aged care workforce shortage is real, and it's here right now. But as we all know, we've all been talking about this for a long, long time. CEDA's put out reports. And really there's been no systemic or concerted effort from all levels of government, providers, the community and our customers. In aged care alone, we're actually going to need over 100,000 new workers by 2030, and right now we have about 6,000 RNs short just for aged care. That's not for any other sector. We've got vacancy rates, increasing across all sectors, and I think we've heard before, burnout is real, and the workforce is also ageing. I am not talking, I guess, so much about Apollo, but in terms of what I see as the longer term solutions, we need system integration and reform. We need to move towards a national care workforce, which is what you were just talking about, a strategy that cuts across all of our sectors. We need to harmonise screening, qualifications, training and regulatory oversight, and we need shared pathways and portability across sectors, because I think we all agree here that we are all in the care sector. There is some specialisation, absolutely, but for me, working in both disability and aged care, we are doing very similar work, just with different cohorts of people. I think we need to get better at valuing and professionalising our workforce. We need better wages and conditions. Aged care has gone some way in that way. We need to really be clear on the career pathways, what the specialisation options are, and the leadership tracks for people. And we need to actually recognise care work as essential and skilled and dignified work. And we saw that through COVID. The sectors that kept us going were our care sectors, people in retail, the jobs that aren't generally the ones that are valued. I think we need to actually start a care pipeline, and that starts in schools. Let's start talking about aged care, disability, mental health, education. Let's start talking about them as valued careers, and let's inspire children. At my last organisation, we actually started a program for 15 to 17-year-olds, and we brought through about 100 people. And my daughter was actually one of them. I took her to fast food, said, "Come and work in aged care." And they weren't qualified, and they were, in the award like on a level 1. But we did do a lot of training. We also brought parents in to explain to them, what is it going to look like, because there's a lot of grief and loss in aged care. So that was a really successful program. At Apollo, we've also started what we call DCW, a direct care worker program, and that's where we meet with people in the community. You might be at your local Woolies and say, you're great at customer service, would you love a job in aged care? Because we'd really like to talk to you about that. And we bring them on, and then we give them the basics. They're a level 1, which they're allowed to be under our award. And then we talk to them about the career pathways, because they've got the right characteristics to really care for people. I think we need better alignment between TAFE and RTOs and actually what our workforce need is. I know there's some RTOs out there that do a really great job, but where I've worked, we've had some that will just put someone in, a placement in, but there's no support really for us and our workforce on the ground to actually support that person in a meaningful way. But also, we're busy on the ground, taking care of older people, and so it really does need an extra support in there, and I think they're the RTOs that are actually working. I'm telling you all my ideas. I think we need to fund structured, supported transition to work models, so paid placements, actual mentoring programs, and better induction and onboarding support. Migration has been something that's come about, and we have at Apollo, we use the PALM scheme, International Qualified Nurses and Sponsored RNs, and that has been great. But again, we need to think longer term, because as I said, 110,000 by 2030 in aged care, we're not only going to get that from overseas, and we need to look at what we're doing in our own backyard to grow our workforce. I think they do need to be streamlined more, because the migration pathway is a nightmare, it costs a bomb, and it takes a bloody long time. So while you're waiting for your worker to come over, you're spending an absolute packet in agency, which quite frankly, we're not funded for the premiums that agencies charge. And I think there needs to be better workforce data and planning at a national level, and actually share those learnings across all of our sectors. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Coming back to Emma, I think that the intention of you going around and talking to all these unions and then coming to a common ground, and that was a feat in terms of having a common EBA, multi-sector EBA. Can you talk more on the politics of working with the unions? Because everybody would want to know how do you get those people on the table and then start talking, and 9.5 months? Good on you.
It wasn't easy, it was definitely a challenge, but they were very supportive of it, because I think everything that's just been articulated is about how do we create the closest thing to one system, and how do we have the transferable skills and the notion that you can go across sectors and you can work in different and multiple areas. Right now, our systems are prohibitive. They don't allow us to do it. The qualifications don't work, the systems don't work, they don't marry up. We can't move people from one sector to another. I've got providers who are similar to yourselves who have aged care, disability and childcare, and we can't move our trainees across each sector because they don't match in line with the qualifications. So with the unions, I think it was a really interesting piece. We had to go out and actually pitch them the idea of white careers and what it would mean, and what it would obviously look for them in terms of an attraction of a young membership to the unions as well was very attractive to them, obviously. But I think at the same time they were supportive of the fact that they knew collaboration is needed, cross-functional collaboration is needed, and they're just as divided and cross-sectioned as us, because the HSU doesn't represent disability in New South Wales. It's the other union of bits and pieces, and the Nurses Association had to do something different for us because they don't have representation in Tasmania. So this wonderful land of ours, this country, which is federated and brings us all the challenges of state-based legislation versus federal legislation versus all this, is what's caused all the complications. The fact that we have this crisis, and I agree it's an opportunity to, how do we turn that crisis into an opportunity, is the reason we all need to stand together and deliver something that can actually be unified across the sector. Unions will definitely be supportive of it, but I think our biggest challenge is employers, and it's the profit before the product, before the person, before the quality, particularly in the childcare industry, the people that we work with, the not-for-profits, they're struggling. We're doing the best work with them because they care about the human-centred approach to what it takes, versus the profiteers who drive an Aston Martin and tell me they can't afford to put a training on. So how do we change perceptions? How do we change mindsets? How do we change what we currently have in our systems today? We have to continue these conversations, but they need to be more than conversations. We need the devs of the world to be agitators to make sure that politicians and policymakers and people understand that the system it's fractured. It might not be completely broken, but it is definitely fractured. And to put the pieces back together, you said it was a jigsaw puzzle, and that's the really hard part, because it is a massive jigsaw puzzle with probably over 100,000 pieces, and how do you join them together? You can start with the edges, but every time we start with the edges break, because someone then says, well, you can't do that over there because that's Western Australia, but you can do it over here. Just yesterday, we were trying to get an approved qualification in Western Australia for OSH, but they have removed the OSH qualification in 2023 in Western Australia. So we can't use the provider and the OSH qualification that we have here, because there's only one provider, but it's not approved as a traineeship. Yet everywhere else in Australia, I can get the traineeship approved, and I can get it done, and I've got trainees and young people working. So they're the challenges, but am I an optimist? Yes, I am. I'm not a blind optimist. I believe in a brighter future. I believe in the fact that people in this room and people all across Australia want to change this system. They want to break it, and they want to make it better. And so we can do that together, and I think that we keep challenging the status quo, we keep amplifying their voices, and we amplify the voice of young people, which is really important to us at the Y, to ensure that young people's voices are heard every single day, and they're given a chance to be listened to and heard, and we design for them. The future of your workforce is Gen Z and Gen Alpha. If you're not ready for them now, then you won't have a future workforce. Your average aged care worker is 43 years old. Yes, they'll stay for the next 10, 15 years, and they'll be 60, and we'll have a fantastic retirement party for them. But as they get older, there's more work cover claims. Young people want to work in these industries. They want to be there. They want to use AI. They want to develop technology and give you platforms and systems that you currently don't have right now. Data in this industry is ludicrous. You ask for stats on people's workforce, only some of the best providers can provide it to you. You ask for multi-generational reports to understand what the diversity looks like in those communities and who are the residents and the people that you're working for. We'll try and find that for you. We have a workforce of young, talented entrepreneurs, innovators who can come into your industries and make that stuff happen. They can make it happen overnight for you. We have to embrace it. So, long and short is, get on board Gen Z, get ready for Gen Alpha, and let's try and change the system together, because it's coming, the avalanche is here, and we have to stare into it and we can't run away from it.
Thank you.
But sorry, I'm butting in. Similarly, the other opportunity is the ageing workforce. So, and I think legislatively, they actually need to change something around the pension so that people can work in our care sectors as they get older and not be penalised financially and have their pension taken away from them. I mean, we keep talking about an ageing workforce. Why aren't we kind of developing strategies where we can say, yeah, come on in and work for us? I think I was speaking to Paul before, and he was saying in the armed forces, they actually have a thing, if you go and volunteer, you don't get financially penalised. Why don't we have that for the care sector? Bum, bum, bum.
Thank you. I'll go on silent, pick up a question for Lee to answer. What strategies can leaders deploy to address workforce burnout in the care and support sector?
Gosh, that's a big question. And I guess I just want to declare that I don't work in any of the sectors really that we're talking about today. So I feel like a little bit of an interloper. So my background is in social work. I've worked in child and family welfare. But if I talk about the sector that we work very closely with through our programs, so through the education sector, early childhood education and care in particular, I think there's a couple of key things, and you may need to repeat the question, keep me on track, because I'll go off on wild tangents otherwise. Dev, I think there's, and we've heard it a lot today already, but there is a very fragmented early childhood ECS sector, and so the federated model that we have in this country is one challenge. Our state and federal funding guidelines are another. Our different models of early childhood care is an additional factor on the top. So one solution is not going to work across the whole of that. It needs place-based responses to really think about how you build local capacity. In thinking about an organisational level though, and it might just help if I provided some context. So one of the programs that the Alannah and Madeline Foundation deliver is our early childhood consultancy service, which specifically goes into early year settings in Victoria at this stage, and works very closely with educators in those services to pair up their deep understanding of pedagogy and curriculum in early childhood with our expertise as social workers and psychologists and counsellors around working with trauma and families experiencing high levels of vulnerability. And if we leverage that in partnership and work closely with one another, what we get is a reduction in that 43% that I talked about before, of 43% of the workforce that we surveyed looking to exit early childhood within the next 12 months. That figure dropped down with coaching and support, not just training, but with coaching and support across time, down to just over 20%. So we halved the number of people that were looking at exiting. But one of the things that we also found was that the organisations themselves sometimes lacked an understanding of how that vulnerability showed up in their communities, in their children and families that were accessing their services, but also in their workforce. So that educator who was taking off a lot of time because they were feeling very overwhelmed with the amount of demand working in the system, and so they start taking a lot of sick leave and ringing it out before their shift starts to say they're not coming in. It's fairly understandable that as a leader in an organisation that becomes really annoying. But what we found was that if you can actually work with those organisations to shift in the same way that we say in regards to your work with children and families, rather than saying what's wrong with them, if we can shift the conversation to what's happening for them. So that child that's throwing the chairs or biting everyone or putting, swearing abuse at the educators, or it's the one, the one child in services that, other families complain about. If we stop and ask, well, what's happening for them rather than what's wrong with them, we unlock that relational component that we've heard people speak about today in terms of getting to the heart of what that child needs. And it's the same thing for the workforce. If we can stop saying about that worker, well, they're unreliable, or they're useless, or they're reactive, or they're lazy, and we start saying, well, actually, what's actually happening for them? Because they used to be really reliable and turn up for every shift, and they used to be fabulous, but something might be happening for them. What we might see, in fact, is that they're one of the 62%, right? So they're being triggered by the child in their service whose story is their own story. And in the absence of a leadership or an organisation that understands how trauma, how vulnerability shows up, you've got the makings for a problem rather than an opportunity for a solution. So one of the things that we did a few years ago, we created an alliance in Victoria, and we used intervention mapping as a tool to work with the sector, with other sector partners, to say, if we actually wanted to improve early years capacity to work with trauma and vulnerability, what would it look like? And we developed a guide that hopefully Deb can share the QR code. It's available free of charge. It has applicability across all sectors. It has been designed for the early years sector though. If we would actually say, as an organisational leader, what are the things that I need to think about to have a trauma-informed aged care service, a trauma-informed early childhood service, a trauma-informed disability service, so that I can support my people, my staff, my clients, my consumers, my local community. And then we ran a community of practice that brought those very fragmented services together to sit around a table, a virtual one, but to sit around a table and say, so how are you going with that? So what are you seeing in your service? And what that became, incidentally, was a real eye on quality. Because for many of those services, about 70% in this country of early childhood services are run by single-site operators. So for most of them, they're in an echo chamber. They're out in their communities and their childcare service. Maybe there's 10 other childcare services in their local community, but they never talk to one another. Some might be for profit. A competitors down the road competing for enrolments, they don't talk to each other. And they're not for profit down the road, well, they're not talking to them either. But the one thing that they all have in common is children. So if we bring them together and we have conversations about how do we keep our children safe, what does quality look like, what do we need from our workforce, then there's real magic to unlock there.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the context and explanation. Alissa, from Slido, on carers, it says, how can we encourage or incentivize workplaces to be more flexible for carers to re-enter or stay in the workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say generally in aged care, I wouldn't have said our rosters were as flexible as they could be. To be honest, during COVID, I was one of those lucky ones in Canberra who had their armed forces come in and do the vaccinations. Everyone liked that, I must say everyone enjoyed that. But where was I going with that?
Carers,
incentivising them. So I guess our rosters, we were very flexible during COVID. We're not very flexible now in terms of our roster. And so, say if a mum or dad says, I only want to work school hours, that's quite hard for us. I think we're very focused as a sector on attraction, but we're less focused on retention and retention strategies and what that actually looks like. We have employed a number of strategies. So one is looking at who has left our organisation over the last year, 2 years, and contacting them and finding out, where are they at, would they be interested in, coming back. The other thing we've done is like looking at exit surveys and understanding, and not just, you tick and flick exit survey, who's leaving, when are they leaving in their journey with us and why are they leaving with us? And then looking at that data to kind of tell us things like your onboarding and induction isn't good enough. People aren't feeling welcomed, or expectations haven't been met of coming to the job as a carer, and I think it's going to be this, but actually it's something completely different and I don't want to do that. What are some of the lessons? Some of it is has been around culture, so really investing in culture, and from the top. We actually have Every site has a workforce committee, and myself and the CEO attend every one. It is a bit paper intensive, but it's important for us to really be with each workforce and hear from our carers, the cleaners, maintenance, what's actually going on for them. We've also brought in Care Friends, which is like a referral app, and so our staff get effectively paid for referrals, but through an app, and they can cash them out when they want to cash them out. Most of them cash it out at the end of the year when they might be buying presents for their children or loved ones. But I think as a sector, we have to be better at telling our stories, and that's not something new. You all know that we hear a lot of bad things in the media, and rightly so, but we don't hear a lot of good things, and we don't really share with each other the good things. So we have a platform at Apollo Care through our culture partner, and it's all about showcasing. So everyone showcases the good things that happened that day, or something that, was really great that happened with one of our residents or their family, or, hey, Susie helped me today. She's not really in my team, but she came and helped me, thanks Susie. So we are all about flipping the narrative. So I did a podcast interview yesterday, and I think I came across like Pollyanna, and he said, what's the hardest thing that you've ever experienced in aged care in your career? And I was like, I think it's all opportunities. It's a really exciting time to be in aged care and disability. We're on the edge of reform. I mean, look at us all here. We're all excited to make it better for people. So I think we have to be better at inspiring people, sharing our stories, and showing all the good things that are actually happening in this amazing care sector.
Thanks, Alissa. Amber, you have talked and give us a lot more information on young people that they want choice. And one of the questions slide over is, what strategies are being considered to address skills development and training for rural, regional and remote care and support workers? In your service and conversation with young people, are you getting that influence or insights? Young people are keen to travel and live in regional and remote Australia.
Not so much that they're keen to travel and live in remote and rural Australia, but it's quite interesting that our first partners and most of the first movers that we've had, from an employer perspective, have been regionally based, because the need is great, but they haven't been able to attract young people to their service. So we've got an example in Mount Isa where we were working with an ECEC partner, and they said there's no way young people want to come and work here. They were opening and closing the EC centre on a weekly basis because they couldn't meet ratios. So we went out and found them 7 fantastic young people in their local community, but it wasn't because we put a seek out up, it was because we went and infiltrated the local community and found out where the football club was and who works in those associations and where the programs are that they hang out, and did they know about the fact that they had 2 ECEC centres where you could get a job, and did you understand what it was? So young people today are really innovative and they can explore, but they don't know what they don't know. So if we have to do a better job of amplifying the stories, how do we make this sector sexy? Because this is the problem. The young people do want to get into it, right? But I don't see too many of them putting their hands up and saying, yeah, I want to be the CEO of an aged care centre when I'm older. So how do we bring it back? Exactly, that's right.
How do you bring sexy back?
How do you bring sexy back? But how do you do that? How do you communicate that in rural and regional communities? I think we found that the best way is basically going out and meeting the local people and meeting the local people that influence those young people. I was telling colleagues here on the table today that some of the stats we've had in our previous work is that 66% of all young people, when asked, why did you start a traineeship or why did you start an apprenticeship, was mum and dad told me it was a really great idea to do. So the parents have to buy into this as well. The parents have to know there's a future for their child, and young people need to know there's a pathway. Every single young person that we interview says, where does this get me? Does this get me to nursing? Yes, it does. Does this get me to this? Yes, it does. Do you know you can do marketing in an aged care centre? Do you know you can do really cool podcasts? You know you can do, gardening and maintenance and all the other jobs you can work outside. You can do. I didn't know about that about aged care. I didn't know that about ECEC centres. So we have to show and demonstrate the breadth of what this sector can do, but we also have to come back to my original proposal is it has to be cross-functional. They've got to be able to work across different sectors, experience different parts of the sector and find their pathway. and be a holistic carer and not be pigeonholed into one specific industry, because they do like to move, and some of us traditionally will say, oh, they're job hopping, but they're not job hopping, they're going and experiencing things, and they'll even might come back. They might go off to another service or another sector and go, that really wasn't for me, and they'll come back to childcare and go, this is really what I want to do. And we have to embrace that. They think differently to us. They are not standing around for the golden watch 15 years later. Today's 10-year-old is going to have 17 different jobs in 6 different sectors with an entrepreneurial business on the side, and 10 of those jobs haven't been created yet. So if we don't embrace that as part of being flexible in our workforces, and how do we do that, create those environments for those people, young people won't come to your business. You'll be stuck with an ageing workforce, with an ageing clientele if it's in the aged care sector, and young people will vote with their feet. They'll go where they're doing meaningful work somewhere else. And the other statistic I talked about with the colleagues on the table here was that today's young person will quit a higher paying job that is meaningless and go take a lower paying job that is meaningful. They'll do it 70% of the time if they feel their work is not contributing to a high good. And they're also going to come and ask you why you have plastic cups in the staff room, because they are environmentally conscious. They're going to walk up to CEOs like Nicole and say, Nicole, I disagree with that strategy with you, because they've had a voice that has been amplified since the day they woke up with a mobile phone in their hand. They've had a platform to be bold and brave. We think they're upstarts sometimes, and we think they're a bit, oh my gosh, how dare they come and speak to me that way? That's how they're built, and we have to be ready for it. We should accept that as a gift and unwrap that present and drive innovation and drive change and drive a new way of thinking of a world of work for young people within our organisations in this sector. And if we can do that and embrace some of the older programs to make sure we've got that awesome intergenerational care in our organisations, it'll be fantastic. Intergenerational piece is a huge piece. We're doing some research right now with the Australian Intergenerational Community Practice, and all our markers of happiness all go up when we are working in an intergenerational environment. Someone said today it takes the village to build the child. But when we lived in villages, we were all happier because Granny was there, Uncle was there, Auntie was there. Someone mentioned about our First Nations culture. It is madness that this country does not embrace that more and learn from these elders. They don't sit at board tables, they sit in circles for a reason, because there is no hierarchy. Land management, fire management, we wouldn't have fires if we listened to our First Nations people. This sector can learn a lot from that as well, in terms of how do we embrace some of those learnings of thousands and thousands of cultural years of living and working together as intergenerational communities to bring young people forward. And I think that's my aspiration, and it's an aspiration that I hold, that hopefully one day our system can be symbiotic, it can be cohesive, and we can have pathways for young people and all people across the entire sector.
Okay. I would like to get some concluding remarks on workforce, but if you want to have a trauma-informed lens on the concluding remarks.
Yeah, so if we know that 62% of our community have experienced at least one form of child maltreatment, then they're the people that are working for us. And that being trauma-informed is a real buzzwordy term. It feels almost like the tide's turning. People are getting a bit sick of hearing about that. So let's talk about it instead as vulnerability. When people have vulnerability, when communities have high saturation of vulnerability, high rates of socioeconomic disadvantage, high rates of unemployment, high rates of poverty, then we've got to think about our service design and the way we work with local communities that understands that. And we can draw young people into our workforces, fabulous. But we won't keep them unless we have organisationally thought about, as each and every organisation that we work for and work with, unless we're thinking about how that vulnerability is going to show up, and how we support and scaffold that workforce post-qualification. Unless we have processes and systems in place that make sure that we're keeping an eye on the way we support people, particularly in that first 12 months after they've got the qualification. The hard reality of doing that job day in and day out is experienced by them. So, I guess my key message is that if you want to keep the workforce that you are successfully able to recruit and you want to invest in them, then it's going to take time and effort. Coaching on its own, training on its own is not going to solve all the problems that you have, but how you invest in that workforce through collaboration, through coaching and other forms of support, particularly that first 12 months.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that we are a fragmented care sector, but we're all doing great work in all of our sectors. So I think it's up to us to work together and lobby government particularly to look at how we can come together as one sector. And, you know, let's bring sexy back together.
Thank you.
I'll just drop the mic because I'm not going to say that.